The words carry multiple meanings simultaneously. Acknowledgement of terrible price exacted by disease that emptied traditional authority structures, declaration that such catastrophe severed previous obligations through fundamental disruption, assertion that survival itself constitutes legitimate claim to self-determination, recognition that absence created possibility for presence of different social arrangements. The envoy's expression reveals momentary confusion followed by dawning recognition that your response constitutes neither negotiation nor outright rebellion, but something more fundamentally challenging, rejection of the conceptual framework underlying his mission's purpose. His gaze travels beyond you to assembled community, faces showing neither hostility nor fear, but calm certainty, born of seasons, lived according to principles, demonstrated effective through daily implementation. Perhaps I've been unclear, the envoy attempts, reverting to diplomatic script, despite growing awareness of its irrelevance to situation encountered. Baron Thornfield now holds legal title to these lands through royal decree. Residence without formal acknowledgement of his lordship constitutes trespass under kingdom law. Elsbeth steps slightly forward, her voice carrying clearly across distance, separating fundamentally different worldviews. We acknowledge your words. We recognize Baron Thornfield exists, as does the king, as do their parchments and decrees. But here, her gesture encompasses not just assembled community, but entire valley. We have buried our dead, tended soil, shared harvest, and governed ourselves through covenant rather than command. We claim no authority beyond our boundaries. We recognize none within them, save what we freely grant each other. Her statement presents neither belligerence nor theoretical manifesto, but simply articulates lived reality that has proven itself through seasons of practical implementation. The community's silent presence behind her carries eloquence beyond words. People standing together, not through coercion or hierarchy, but through conscious choice and demonstrated mutual benefit. The envoy's gaze travels once more across gathered faces, registering absence of traditional village hierarchy, noting diversity of ages and origins, suggesting community formed through consent rather than accident of birth, observing postures, indicating neither submission nor aggressive challenge, but simply grounded self-possession. Something shifts in his assessment, not necessarily agreement but recognition that situation differs fundamentally from expectations that framed his mission. Without further argument, he wheels his horse, gesture neither dramatic nor threatening, but simply acknowledging current interaction's conclusion. His retinue follows, banner hanging limp, as if symbolic authority it represents has momentarily lost animating force. No explicit threat accompanies their departure, none proves necessary given underlying assumption that traditional power structures eventually reassert themselves against temporary aberrations. As riders disappear down Eastern Road, community remains gathered, silence holding momentary victory, alongside recognition of likely consequences. This encounter represents, not conclusion, but opening exchange in contest between fundamentally different conceptions of social organization. The Baron's formal claim through traditional authority channels establishes foundation for potential escalation should diplomatic approach prove ineffective. That evening, community gathers, not in Manor's great hall, but in orchard where apple blossoms have begun opening, delicate white petals emerging from pink buds, in perfect metaphor for possibility unfolding from potential. Lanterns hang from branches, their golden light transforming ordinary trees into cathedral space, more sacred than any built structure, precisely because it manifests life's constant renewal rather than imposed permanence. The meeting begins without formal announcement. conversation flowing naturally from shared experience toward collective consideration of implications and potential responses. Unlike winter treaty discussions conducted during leisure created by seasonal pause in agricultural cycle, this gathering occurs amid spring's urgent demands for planting, for repair, for implementation, rather than planning. Yet participation remains robust. Recognition that external challenge requires internal cohesion renewed through conscious recommitment. You find yourself speaking not from designated authority, but from recognized role as one who articulates collective understanding. Today we encountered not just Baron Thornfield's envoy, but competing vision of human relationship to land and one another. Their claim rests on parchment, on tradition, on distant authority. Ours grows from direct engagement with soil, with seasons, with each other's needs and capacities. Heads nod, recognition that fundamental conflict transcends specific demands for resumed obligations to encompass entirely different conceptions of legitimacy itself, where traditional authority derives from inheritance, from royal grant, from theological justification for hierarchy. Your community's governance emerges from demonstrated effectiveness at supporting mutual flourishing, from continuous consent renewed through practice, from principles tested through implementation rather than imposed through doctrine. Discussion unfolds addressing practical concerns beyond philosophical foundations, potential responses should Baron escalate beyond diplomatic approach, strategies for maintaining community cohesion under external pressure, considerations regarding refugees from other regions where traditional authority successfully reimposed itself through force, possibilities for alliance with similar communities experimenting with alternative governance in plague's aftermath. Elsbeth speaks to immediate defensive preparations. We've anticipated this moment through winter planning. Watchtowers at valley entrances remain staffed. Signal systems between outlying homesteads and village center stand ready. Food stores could sustain us through siege, though spring planting would be compromised. Willem addresses longer-term considerations. Direct military confrontation favors traditional authority with trained forces and superior weaponry. Our strength lies elsewhere, in knowledge of local terrain, in community cohesion, in legitimate claim to land we actually cultivate. We must leverage these advantages while avoiding scenarios which privilege their strengths over ours. Bun Thomas the Weaver, body increasingly frail, but mind sharp with decades of observation, offers historical perspective. After great mortality last century, similar conflicts arose between lords attempting to maintain pre-plague obligations and commons discovering newfound leverage through labor scarcity. Results varied by region, some achieving lasting concessions through organized resistance, others suffering harsh suppression when acting in isolation. The conversation continues as twilight deepens toward night, blossoms luminous against darkening sky. No formal vote concludes discussion. No single resolution emerges from complex considerations. Instead, layered response develops through collective wisdom, immediate vigilance without provocative militarization, continued commitment to spring planting despite uncertainty, diplomatic outreach to neighboring communities facing similar challenges, preparation for potential escalation, while maintaining primary focus on covenant implementation within boundaries you can directly influence. As stars emerge overhead, constellations unchanged by human conflicts below, the gathering transitions naturally from strategic planning to ceremonial recommitment. You find yourself speaking words that emerge not from calculation, but from core conviction, shaped through seasons of shared experience. We till our land. The phrase encompasses not just agricultural activity, but fundamental relationship with soil that sustains, stewardship rather than ownership, reciprocity rather than extraction. The community responds in chorus, voices blending in affirmation that transcends mere agreement to express shared identity. We till our land. We guard our peace. This acknowledges defensive necessity, while emphasizing what requires protection, not merely territory, but social arrangement based on mutual recognition rather than domination. We guard our peace. Comes unified response. Volume increased, not through individual shouting, but through choral harmony. We welcome strangers, even amid potential conflict. This principle maintains community's fundamental openness, recognizing human connection beyond arbitrary boundaries, while establishing ethical distinction from hierarchy's exclusionary practices. We welcome strangers, responds gathering, affirmation particularly meaningful coming from community, now including many who arrived initially as outsiders, yet found belonging through contribution rather than birthright. We bow to none. The final declaration articulates not arrogance, but recognition of inherent dignity, requiring no external validation, neither submission to illegitimate authority nor dominance over others, but fundamental equality manifest through covenant rather than hierarchy. We bow to none. The response rises through orchard, like wind through branches, natural force moving individual elements in unified pattern, while each maintains distinctive character. As vocal declaration concludes, silence returns, not absence but presence, not void but potential. Lantern light catches apple blossoms from below, illuminating delicate structures normally visible only through direct sunlight. The beauty speaks to possibility emerging from dormancy, to resilience manifest through seasonal cycles, to renewal possible even after catastrophic disruption. That night, returning to your cottage beneath star-strewn sky, you reflect on distance traveled since plague first emptied traditional authority structures. The confrontation at bridge represents not aberration but inevitable encounter between fundamentally different conceptions of social organization, one based on extraction justified through tradition, another on mutual flourishing demonstrated through practice. Whether your community's experiment survives external pressure remains uncertain. That it has existed at all stands as testimony to possibility beyond arrangements previously accepted as inevitable as seasons. Sleep comes despite uncertainty precisely because uncertainty itself has become familiar companion throughout reconstruction process. Each season presented challenges unanticipated yet addressed through collective wisdom rather than hierarchical command. The covenant exists not just in winter treaty document, but in daily practices, in decision-making processes, in relationships reconfigured according to dignity rather than dominance. Even should external forces eventually dismantle specific implementations, the knowledge of possibility cannot be unlearned. Outside, spring night creatures sing songs unchanged by human drama, frogs awakening in seasonal pools, owls hunting silent winged through darkness, wind moving through early leaves, with whispered promise of growth, regardless of whose name appears on distant parchment, claiming ownership. The continuity offers strange comfort, recognition that all human systems exist within larger patterns that both constrain and support our brief innovations. Roots remember every winter they've endured, yet still rise with spring's invitation. Your community similarly holds memory of hierarchy survived, of absence transformed into presence, of vacancy becoming opportunity. This remembrance strengthens rather than weakens, providing context for current challenge, while affirming capacity for response grounded in principles tested through implementation rather than merely declared through doctrine. So will you rise, not through naive optimism, disregarding legitimate threat, not through militarized resistance mimicking domination systems you've rejected, but through continued cultivation of social arrangements, demonstrating alternative to hierarchy's extractive logic. The specifics remain to be navigated through unfolding circumstances. The foundation stands secure in covenant, renewed through conscious choice, rather than mere habit or external obligation. The spring stirring carries both sweet possibility of renewal and bitter recognition of resistance to fundamental change. Yet, the orchard blossoms, regardless of competing claims to its fruit, life's persistence, offering testament to transformation possible when absence creates space for reimagining what seemed immutable before plague temporarily emptied traditional structures of their enforcement capacity. Tomorrow will bring continued implementation of spring planting, ongoing vigilance at valley boundaries, potential diplomatic initiatives toward neighboring communities facing similar challenges. The work continues, not despite uncertainty, but precisely because seeds must be sown, regardless of who ultimately claims harvest. The covenant finds expression through practical action rather than mere declaration. Each decision, each interaction, each implementation of principles gradually accumulating into social landscape, fundamentally altered from what plague initially emptied. The testimony stands silent, yet undeniable. Another way remains possible. By midsummer, the first coins minted with the wheat sheaf emblem slide across markets far beyond the valley. Traders tell tales of a place where workers own fields and wages float to meet need. Some dismiss it as myth, but many follow the rumor westward, pockets lined with barter, hearts lit with possibility. You watch caravans arrive, healers, glassblowers, a troupe of shadow puppeteers, each one barters skill for belonging, weaving new threads through the communal fabric. The once quiet square now hums like a loom, weaving prosperity measured in artistry, in healed wounds, in evenings where children gasp at paper tigers dancing in fire-lit tents. One dusk you climb the bell tower, repaired now with oak beams and hope, ringing a new peal that rolls across fields like laughter. The sound layers over birdsong, over distant blacksmith clang, over the softer music of wind in wheat. You imagine the bell's bronze throat speaking to every road still haunted by silence, saying there is life after grief, and it is abundant. The market square transforms beneath midsummer sun, once empty amid plague's devastation, then cautiously reactivated during previous trading seasons, now vibrant with commerce, unlike any the valley witnessed before social reorganization. Canopies in jewel tones provide shade, while displaying goods from increasing distance, fabrics from coastal regions, spices from southern provinces, tools crafted by artisans, responding to growing reputation of community where fair exchange replaces feudal extraction. What distinguishes this market from mere revival of traditional commerce appears in multiple dimensions. The arrangement of stalls forms rough circle rather than hierarchy, placing luxury goods in premium positions. Conversations flow horizontally between producers rather than vertically between status levels. Most significantly, silver coins passing between palms bear simple wheat sheaf design rather than royal profile, tangible symbol of alternative economic principles extending beyond valley boundaries. You move through bustling square, observing transactions that demonstrate covenant principles translated into commercial reality. A potter trades ceramic vessels for wool without either party attempting to extract maximum advantage from temporary scarcity. A traveling musician accepts payment in combination of food, shelter, and modest silver, rather than demanding standardized fee regardless of community resources. Children learn market mathematics through direct participation rather than theoretical instruction, counting change, calculating equivalencies, understanding value creation in terms of actual human needs, rather than arbitrary status markers. What strikes you most profoundly is atmosphere pervading these exchanges. The absence of anxious calculation that characterized traditional market interactions, where peasants perpetually operated from disadvantage against merchants connected to aristocratic protection. In its place flows current of mutual recognition, each transaction acknowledging fundamental dignity of participants, regardless of relative position or specialized skill. Willem approaches, wiping sweat from brow already darkened by forge work completed before market's midday peak. His expression combines satisfaction at community's obvious flourishing with vigilance born of winter's strategic planning sessions. The Baron's envoy has not returned since spring confrontation at Bridge, but watchtowers remain staffed, signal systems practiced weekly, defensive preparations maintained alongside agricultural development. The wheat sheaf coins travel farther each month, he observes, nodding toward merchant, clearly from distant region, judging by distinctive garb and unfamiliar accent. I spoke with sole trader, who claims he's seen them accepted in markets 3 counties south. People ask questions about their origin. The information confirms both opportunity and risk inherent in your community's growing visibility. Each traveler carrying wheat sheaf currency beyond valley boundaries represents both commercial connection and conceptual transmission, practical demonstration that alternatives to traditional economic arrangements function effectively rather than merely theoretical possibility. And what do they hear in response? You ask, watching exchange between glass blower, recently settled in community, and visitor seeking specialty lenses for scholarly work. Stories, Willem replies, some accurate, others exaggerated through retelling. Tales of village where plague survivors refused returning. Lord established self-governance without gallows. Distribute harvest by need rather than status. He pauses, eyes tracking movement of mounted messenger entering square from Eastern Road, alert to potential communication from neighboring communities facing similar challenges from traditional authority. Reassertion. The Baron cannot ignore us much longer, not when our example spreads through currency and commerce. The observation hangs without requiring explicit response, acknowledgement that expanding influence brings both validation of social experiment and increased likelihood of opposition from traditional power structures threatened by demonstrated alternative. Your community walks balance between necessary engagement with wider world and protective boundaries against external interference, the membrane necessarily permeable yet selectively so, according to covenant principles. As afternoon advances toward evening, market activity transforms gradually from purely commercial exchange to cultural celebration characteristic of your community's regular pattern. Visitors originally drawn by trading opportunities remain for performances organized spontaneously rather than through formal schedule. Shadow puppeteers from eastern provinces demonstrate ancient storytelling techniques. Local musicians collaborate with traveling players creating hybrid melodies. Children present dramatization of community origin story, incorporating both historical accuracy and mythic elements appropriate to foundational narrative. You notice Elsbeth engaged with group of women, clearly visiting from another settlement, their attentive expressions suggesting more than casual conversation about marketplace goods. Moving closer without interrupting, you overhear discussion focusing on midwifery practices, on community childcare arrangements, enabling mothers' participation in governance, on educational approaches, recognizing children as community members rather than merely familial dependents. The exchange represents knowledge transfer beyond material commerce, social technologies shared through informal networks, like seeds carried on wind currents beyond original planting. As twilight approaches, with market officially concluded, yet visitors integrated into evening community activities, you feel drawn toward bell tower, adjoining church building, repurposed since plague for gatherings, transcending strict religious designation. The structure, damaged during winter storms years earlier and left unrepaired during Manor's abandonment, underwent restoration through community effort, practical implementation of covenant principle regarding preservation of useful heritage, while rejecting hierarchical purposes originally intended. You climb wooden steps, recently replaced by collective labor, each craftsperson contributing according to skill rather than compelled through tithe or taxation. The ascent provides progressive perspective shift, ground-level details receding as broader patterns emerge with heightened vantage. Reaching platform beneath bronze bells suspended from new oak beams, you gain panoramic view, encompassing both immediate village center and surrounding agricultural landscape, stretching toward forest boundaries and distant hills. From this elevation, transformation becomes visible in ways daily immersion might obscure. Fields once demarcated strictly by purpose and ownership now display integrated pattern reflecting covenant principles, grain cultivation interspersed with vegetable plots, orchards underplanted with complementary crops, pathways connecting rather than dividing production areas. The manor structure remains physically imposing on its slight rise, yet functions now as community center rather than hierarchical symbol, its orientation within social geography fundamentally altered, while stone walls stand unchanged. Most striking from elevated perspective is Market Square itself, the concentric arrangement of temporary stalls around central gathering space, creating visual manifestation of covenant governance principles. Unlike traditional markets where spatial arrangement reinforces status hierarchies, this pattern physically embodies concepts of equality, accessibility, transparency in literal as well as metaphorical dimensions. The bell beside you, silent since plague, initially empty traditional authority structures, represents both continuity and transformation. Originally installed to mark religious observances, to announce noble arrivals, to warn of danger, to regulate peasant labor according to manorial schedule, it now awaits new purpose, aligned with covenant principles rather than hierarchical command. Its bronze throat, designed to project sound across landscape, offers metaphorical voice to community ordinarily expressing itself through distributed conversation rather than singular pronouncement. Without conscious planning, your hand reaches for rope dangling from bell's clapper mechanism. The impulse arises not from nostalgia for traditional authority, but from recognition that celebratory moments deserve acknowledgement, transcending ordinary communication. The market day's success, both commercial exchange and cultural connection, represents milestone worth marking through sound designed to travel beyond immediate gathering. The first pull sends bronze voice rolling across valley, deep vibration felt physically before registering orally. The sound carries different significance than historical associations would suggest, not commanding attendance at compulsory service, not announcing aristocratic arrival demanding deference, not signaling emergency requiring immediate response, but simply celebrating community flourishing through voluntary association governed by covenant rather than command. You establish rhythm, intentionally distinct from traditional church bells or manor signals, pattern communicating through tonal quality and spacing, rather than predetermined code, understood only by initiates. The resonance layers over existing soundscape, birdsong continuing, uninterrupted, distant hammer strikes from blacksmith's evening work, maintaining steady counterpoint, wind through ripening wheat fields, providing constant undertone to momentary human expression. From elevated position, you observe response rippling through community gathered below, faces turning skyward, conversations pausing momentarily to acknowledge unexpected sound, children pointing toward tower, with expressions combining surprise and delight. The reaction demonstrates governance maturation, unexpected stimulus processed through collective understanding, rather than triggering anxiety characteristic of populations conditioned to respond automatically to authority signals. As bell's vibrations gradually diminish, bronze returning to stillness after momentary animation, you remain at tower's height, observing transformation from silent witness perspective. Visitors integrate seamlessly into evening activities, now transitioning from market exchange to communal celebration. Recently arrived craftspeople, glassblower, whose delicate vessels reflect firelight in rainbow fractures, healer, whose knowledge supplements local herbal traditions, puppeteers, whose shadow stories connect present moment to ancient mythologies, find places within gathering, not as outsiders, but as contributors to expanding collective identity. The scene below embodies prosperity, fundamentally different from traditional wealth accumulation, abundance, measured not by individual acquisition, but by community flourishing, not by ostentatious display, but by general well-being, not by comparison against others' deprivation, but by sufficiency, supporting creative expression beyond mere survival. The market success demonstrates covenant principles translated from abstract declaration to economic reality, commerce serving human relationship rather than relationship subordinated to commerce. As darkness deepens, with stars emerging overhead while firelight brightens below, you descend bell tower to rejoin community celebration. Each step downward shifts perspective gradually from overview to immersion, theoretical appreciation of social experiment, giving way to lived experience of participation. By time you reach ground level, conceptual assessment has transformed into bodily engagement with present moment, the smell of shared food, the sound of collaborative music, the sight of children learning traditional dances alongside innovative movements created within your own community. The evening unfolds according to pattern established through seasons of collective experience, yet incorporating elements introduced by visitors and recent arrivals. Stories exchange between travelers and residents, narratives from distant regions where traditional authority successfully reimposed itself through force, accounts of communities establishing alternative arrangements similar to your own covenant governance, tales of individuals seeking connection with emerging network of places, experimenting with social organization beyond hierarchical extraction. Through these exchanges, your community's significance clarifies beyond local experiment in self-governance toward node within emerging alternative geography, physical locations connected not through traditional power structures, but through shared commitment to principles, emphasizing mutual flourishing rather than hierarchical command. The wheat sheaf coins represent just one manifestation of this network, physical tokens of conceptual possibility traveling between communities otherwise isolated within landscape dominated by resurgent traditional authority. Later, walking home beneath midsummer stars, brilliant against velvet darkness, you reflect on bell tower moment as unplanned yet perfect symbol of social transformation embodied through your community's evolving covenant. The bell itself, designed for hierarchical communication, yet repurposed for communal celebration, represents heritage selectively preserved, rather than wholesale rejection of what came before. The sound produced, vibrations traveling beyond immediate gathering across entire valley, manifests influence extending beyond physical boundaries through demonstration that alternatives function effectively. You find yourself drawn not toward cottage, but toward quiet spot beside river, where water's constant movement provides counterpoint to human arrangements, temporary by comparison, yet significant within their time frame. Settling on grassy bank, where generations before you have similarly paused for reflection, you allow thoughts to flow like current passing beneath moonlight, carrying both forward momentum and depth beneath surface appearances. What began as survival necessity amid plague's devastating demographic impact has evolved through conscious articulation into social experiment challenging fundamental assumptions underlying traditional hierarchy. The market day's success demonstrates not just material prosperity under alternative arrangements, but conceptual transmission beyond immediate community, seeds carried by traders, by visitors, by wheat sheaf coins circulating through regional exchange networks. You recognize both achievement and continuing vulnerability in this expansion. Each connection with wider world brings both validation of covenant principles and increased likelihood of opposition from traditional authority structures threatened by demonstrated alternative. Whether your community's experiment endures beyond immediate circumstances remains uncertain. That it has existed at all stands as testimony to possibility beyond arrangements previously accepted as inevitable as seasons. The river continues its ancient journey, water molecules constantly changing while pattern maintains consistent direction. Similarly, your community evolves through individual arrivals and departures, while covenant principles provide continuity through specific implementations. The governance established through conscious articulation and daily practice demonstrates resilience precisely because it incorporates change rather than resisting adaptation, flexibility without fundamental compromise of core values. As night deepens toward its center point, with celestial movements marking timescales beyond human perception, you feel momentary transcendence of immediate concerns, connecting present experiment to historical patterns where catastrophic disruption occasionally creates space for social rearrangement beyond continuous evolution. Where the current opening eventually closes through traditional authority reassertion or expands through demonstration effect, remains beyond individual prediction or control. What remains within your influence, within community's collective agency, is quality of present implementation, integrity of covenant principles translated into daily practice, clarity of demonstration that alternatives exist to extractive hierarchy justified through tradition rather than demonstrated effectiveness at supporting human flourishing. The responsibility weighs not as burden but as privilege, participation in conscious articulation of social possibility beyond arrangements previously accepted as natural rather than constructed. You rise finally, body reminding you of physical existence, grounded in particular time and place, despite conceptual exploration of broader implications. Tomorrow brings continued implementation of specific projects, irrigation expansion requiring collective labor, educational development beyond basic literacy toward critical engagement with inherited knowledge, diplomatic outreach to similar communities facing parallel challenges from traditional authority structures. The work continues, not despite uncertainty, but because principles prove worthy, regardless of ultimate longevity. Returning toward village center, where celebration gradually quiets as energy shifts toward rest necessary for tomorrow's continued labor. You pass manor building, repurposed as community center rather than hierarchical symbol. Its windows still glow with activity. Late discussions among those evaluating market day's significance, planning sessions for upcoming agricultural coordination, quiet conversations between recently arrived seekers and established community members, explaining covenant principles through practical examples rather than abstract declaration. The structure itself, stone walls originally designed to separate aristocracy from commons, now serves fundamentally different purpose while maintaining physical integrity. This selective preservation represents covenant approach to heritage, acknowledging continuity while transformed through intention and practice. Unlike reactionary destruction of all symbols associated with previous hierarchy or uncritical maintenance of traditional patterns, your community's approach recognizes baby bathwater distinction, preserving valuable elements while rejecting underlying justifications for inequality. At your own threshold, you pause for a traditional moment of mindful transition between public engagement and personal reflection. The cottage, simple structure in material terms yet profound in significance, represents both individual belonging within collective and necessary space for interiority within communal arrangement. The balance between these dimensions constitutes ongoing navigation rather than fixed resolution. Covenant principles providing framework for weighing competing values rather than rigid formula, applicable regardless of circumstance. Inside, embers still glow from morning fire, banked for evening return. As you kindle flame appropriate for brief reading before sleep claims consciousness, light gradually illuminates humble space, transformed through meaning rather than material enhancement. The room contains few possessions by traditional wealth standards, yet abundance manifests through quality of relationship with community beyond walls, through security derived from mutual support rather than individual accumulation, through meaning generated by participation in significant social experiment rather than status competition. By candlelight, you open journal maintained through seasons of transformation, record beginning during plague's initial emptying of traditional structures, and continuing through deliberate reconstruction, according to covenant principles. Tonight's entry acknowledges market day's significance beyond commercial exchange. The bell spoke today, its voice carrying beyond valley boundaries, those sound waves themselves dissolved at physical limits. Similarly, our covenant principles travel through currency bearing wheat sheaf emblem, through stories carried by traders meeting our representatives, through demonstration that alternatives function effectively rather than merely utopian imagination. Whether specific implementation endures against inevitable opposition from traditional authority matters less than transmission of possibility. The knowledge once experienced cannot be unlearned, even if particular experiment eventually falters. As sleep approaches, candle flame gradually diminishing, as wax surrenders structure to transformation, you recognize profound simplicity underlying community's complex social experiment. Human flourishing requires neither hierarchical extraction justified through tradition, nor complete rejection of inherited wisdom, but conscious articulation of principles tested through daily implementation, adjusted through experience, transmitted through demonstration rather than imposition. The bell's voice echoes now only in memory, yet influence continues rippling through conception as much as perception. Bronze throat, giving momentary expression to community, ordinarily speaking through distributed conversation rather than singular pronouncement. Tomorrow will bring continued manifestation of covenant principles through mundane activities, irrigation coordination, harvest preparation, market accounting, skills exchange, diplomatic communication with neighboring settlements. The mundane itself becomes sacred when infused with conscious intention. Ordinary activities, transformed through alignment with principles, valuing mutual flourishing above hierarchical extraction. Outside, night creatures continue their activities, indifferent to human experiments in social organization. The stars wheel overhead, according to patterns ancient beyond human memory, yet constantly renewed through present observation. Between these scales, cosmic indifference and immediate experience, your community carves meaningful space through conscious covenant, connecting individual existence to collective purpose without sacrificing either dimension to other. The flourishing commons exists not as perfect implementation of abstract ideal, but as ongoing negotiation between principles and practicalities, between individual expression and collective welfare, between historical continuity and necessary innovation. Its achievement lies not in final perfection, but in continuous demonstration that alternatives exist to arrangements previously accepted as inevitable, that absence created by catastrophe can transform into presence of new possibility, that vacancy becomes opportunity when reimagined through intentional covenant rather than merely restored through traditional authority. Sleep finally claims consciousness with dreams, not of utopian perfection, but continued implementation. The daily choices through which theory manifests in lived reality, the ordinary interactions through which covenant principles demonstrate effectiveness at supporting human flourishing. Tomorrow's bell remains silent until occasion worthy of bronze voice presents itself, yet continuous communication flows through countless conversations, through skills exchanged between generations, through decisions made collectively rather than imposed hierarchically. The sound has traveled beyond immediate hearing, yet continues resonating through expanded conception of what remains possible. There is life after grief, and it is abundant. You stand where you began, on the lip of the valley, gaze sweeping from river ribbon to far ridge. The owl you heard years ago now nests with fledglings. Its twilight call threads the dusk. Below, smoke curls from chimneys in measured wisps, each a slender sermon on resilience. You close your eyes and feel the pulse of the land beneath boot soles, steady as drum beats echoing back from the deep past. Remember the ledger burned to ash, the pages of debt turned to nourishment. Remember the treaty inked at midnight, the seed that split stone. Remember hunger turned into feast, fear translated into song. Open them again, and the world sparkles, a fabric mended with gold veins of shared labor and mourning transmuted. You realize that plague did not make you wealthy, it only carved away the lie that you were ever poor. The evening air carries scent of ripening grain, of wood smoke from cooking fires, of wild roses climbing abandoned walls at valley's edge. You stand where you stood seasons ago when plague first emptied traditional authority structures, same physical location, yet viewing landscape fundamentally transformed, not by natural forces, but by human intention, translated through collective action. The changes register not primarily as physical alterations, but as relational reconfiguration, how people connect with land, with resources, with one another following conscious covenant rather than hierarchical extraction. From this elevated vantage, patterns emerge invisible at ground level. Fields once segregated by ownership now display integrated cultivation reflecting covenant principles, grain production interspersed with vegetable gardens, communal orchards permitting gleaning rights, forest edges managed for sustainable harvest rather than exclusive hunting privilege. The manor building remains physically dominant on its small rise, yet its orientation within community has fundamentally shifted, no longer center of authority, but resource for collective activities, ranging from educational gatherings to shared meals during harsh weather. Most significantly, movement throughout landscape follows different choreography than pre-plague arrangements. People traveling paths according to actual need and purpose, rather than permissions granted or denied by hierarchical authority. Work rhythms determined by seasonal necessity and collective agreement, rather than manorial schedule. Interactions characterized by direct engagement, rather than mediated through class-based protocols. The visual manifestation suggests dance where previously existed, march organic pattern replacing rigid formation. Twilight deepens gradually, stars emerging overhead, while valley below kindles lamps in cottage windows. The illumination pattern itself tells story of transformation, light distributed according to actual habitation rather than concentrated in manor windows, while surrounding village remain predominantly dark after sunset. This democratization of illumination represents not just material redistribution, but fundamental shift regarding who deserves visibility, whose activities merit continuation beyond daylight hours, how resources allocate according to covenant principles rather than status hierarchy. As darkness settles fully, owls begin evening hunt, including one particular bird whose territory encompasses ridge where you currently stand. Years ago, during plague's initial uncertainty, this same owl's solitary call provided counterpoint to human silence, spreading through emptying village. Now its voice represents continuity across transformation, natural presence witnessing human arrangements evolving beneath its hunting grounds. The bird has mated successfully, despite territorial pressures from neighboring predators. Fledglings now join nocturnal chorus, with voices distinguishable through slight tonal variations from parent calls. You close your eyes, allowing non-visual senses to evaluate homeland, transformed through covenant governance. The soundscape reveals integration subtler than visual pattern, human activity, neither dominating nor separate from natural rhythms, but interwoven with seasonal cycles, with weather patterns, with wildlife movements. Unlike traditional hierarchy imposing human schedule, regardless of natural context, covenant arrangement demonstrates permeable boundary between cultural organization and ecological reality, each informing other through reciprocal influence rather than dominance relationship. Beneath boot soles, soil itself pulses with vitality, different from pre-plague arrangement, no longer merely substrate from which value extracts, regardless of sustainability, but living community receiving investment according to covenant principles, recognizing intergenerational obligations. The land's response manifests through measurable fertility increases, through erosion reduction, through wildlife population stabilization, tangible feedback validating governance approach, valuing stewardship over mere ownership. These sensory observations converge into holistic recognition. What plague's devastating demographic impact initiated through necessity, covenant governance continued through intention, transformation from extractive hierarchy, justified through tradition toward mutual flourishing, demonstrated through practice. The achievement represents not utopian perfection, but ongoing negotiation between principles and practicalities, between individual expression and collective welfare, between immediacy and sustainability, dynamic balance maintained through continuous conversation rather than rigid formula. Opening eyes again, you observe valley with simultaneous appreciation for specific accomplishment and recognition of continuing vulnerability. The lamplight glowing from occupied dwellings represents both literal illumination and metaphorical demonstration, alternative social arrangement functioning effectively despite traditional authority skepticism or active opposition. Yet this very visibility increases likelihood of eventual confrontation with external powers whose legitimacy faces challenge through mere existence of functioning alternative. The plateau where you stand offers not just physical elevation but temporal perspective, connecting immediate circumstances to historical patterns where catastrophic disruption occasionally creates space for social rearrangement beyond continuous evolution. Whether the current opening eventually closes through traditional authority reassertion or expands through demonstration effect remains beyond individual prediction or control. The responsibility lies not in guaranteeing specific outcome, but in maintaining integrity of present implementation, ensuring covenant principles translate faithfully into daily practice, regardless of ultimate longevity. What registers most profoundly from current vantage is neither specific achievement nor potential vulnerability, but fundamental reframing of wealth itself, revolution not in material arrangement, but conceptual understanding. The covenant community demonstrates prosperity, measured not by individual accumulation, but collective flourishing, not by comparison against others' deprivation, but sufficiency supporting creative expression beyond mere survival, not by extraction from environment, but integration with ecological systems, supporting human activities. This recognition crystallizes through contrast with pre-plague arrangement, where apparent prosperity concentrated in manor house represented fundamentally extractive relationship with both human labor and natural resources, wealth accumulated through systematic appropriation rather than genuine creation. The plague's devastating demographic impact didn't create wealth, but revealed distortion inherent in previous measuring system, carving away pretense that genuine prosperity existed within fundamentally exploitative arrangement. Descending toward valley, as night deepens fully, you move physically from overview to immersion, shifting from theoretical appreciation to lived participation in social experiment that continues evolving through daily implementation. Each step reconnects abstract conceptualization with bodily experience, the actual feeling of covenant principles manifested through ordinary interactions, through governance decisions, through ecological stewardship, through cultural expression. Approaching village center, you encounter community members returning from evening activities, educational gathering at repurposed manor library, skill-sharing session at communal workshop, storytelling circle preserving oral history while integrating recent experiences. Their greetings embody covenant relationship, acknowledgement of individual identity within collective belonging, recognition transcending mere utilitarian interaction without requiring artificial deference, genuine interest in mutual welfare rather than performative nicety, masking hierarchical assessment. Conversations flow naturally as paths converge toward residential area, updates about irrigation project nearing completion, discussion regarding diplomatic communication received from neighboring settlement facing similar challenges from traditional authority, planning for upcoming seasonal transition requiring collective preparation. The information exchanges demonstrate governance maturity, transparency maintained without formal requirement, participation invited without compulsory attendance, decisions emerging through distributed conversation rather than centralized pronouncement. At cottage threshold, familiar transition ritual marks boundary between communal engagement and personal reflection, moment acknowledging both dimensions as essential within covenant lifestyle. Unlike traditional arrangements where private life existed either as privilege of aristocracy or as mere recovery space preparing for next day's required labor. Your community's approach recognizes intrinsic value in both collective participation and individual cultivation, neither subordinated to other, but integrated through conscious navigation rather than rigid separation. Inside modest dwelling, enhanced through seasons of intentional improvement rather than status display, evidence of transformed prosperity manifests through quality rather than quantity, furniture crafted for genuine comfort rather than appearance, utensils designed for actual use rather than impression, decorative elements expressing personal meaning rather than conventional status markers. The space embodies sufficiency rather than excess, intentionality rather than accumulation, relationship rather than possession. As evening settles into deeper night, you light single candle, illumination sufficient for reflection, while conserving valuable resource for genuine necessity rather than wasteful display. The flame's steady glow represents not deprivation compared to manner's previous chandelier extravagance, but appropriate scale connecting individual need with collective resource management, personal choice aligned with covenant principles through internalized understanding rather than external enforcement. By candlelight, memory traverses distance between present moment and plague's initial impact, recalling ledger discovery in abandoned manor office, names recorded by obligation rather than aspiration, destruction through fire transforming instruments of control into literal ash, contributing to soil fertility. That symbolic act represented not mere rejection, but transmutation, history acknowledged rather than erased, yet fundamentally recontextualized through covenant perspective, valuing mutual flourishing above hierarchical extraction. The Midnight Treaty crafted during winter planning sessions similarly rises in recollection, document emerging through collective wisdom rather than imposed declaration, principles articulated through language, accessible to all participants rather than obscured through specialized terminology, commitment expressed through signatures representing genuine choice rather than coerced compliance. The physical parchment matters less than concepts manifested through daily implementation. The covenant lives through practice rather than mere adherence to written code. Most powerfully, memory retrieves contrast between hunger experienced during plague's immediate aftermath and feast organized following first harvest under covenant governance, scarcity transformed not through miraculous abundance, but through equitable distribution, fear transmuted not through elimination of genuine threat, but through shared vulnerability, honestly acknowledged, isolation converted, not through enforced togetherness, but through voluntary association based on mutual recognition. The candle's flame flickers briefly, as night breeze finds entry through window intentionally open despite potential chill, the momentary dance of light and shadow perfectly embodying covenant balance between security and openness, between preservation and innovation, between continuity and transformation. Unlike traditional shutters closed against external threats, both physical and metaphorical, your community's approach acknowledges necessary permeability. Boundaries exist for protection rather than exclusion. Identity establishes connection rather than separation. As sleep approaches, final reflection crystallizes fundamental insight. The plague did not generate wealth, but removed distortion, obscuring accurate assessment. The devastating demographic impact carved away pretense that prosperity existed within fundamentally exploitative arrangement, revealing poverty disguised as natural order through tradition, justifying hierarchy as inevitable rather than constructed. What emerged through covenant governance represents not new creation, but recognition of value always present, yet systematically channeled toward concentrated accumulation rather than distributed flourishing. This understanding transforms narrative from simplistic reversal, peasants becoming wealthy through nobles' misfortune, toward deeper recognition that genuine prosperity exists only through mutual flourishing rather than hierarchical extraction. The covenant community demonstrates wealth measured through relationship quality rather than possession quantity, through creative expression rather than consumption capacity, through ecological integration rather than environment domination. Dreams approach consciousness gradually surrendering to images, neither random nor controlled, but emerging through subconscious integration of waking experience with deeper patterns. The transition itself embodies covenant principles, neither rigid discipline, subordinating nature to culture, nor complete abandonment of intentionality, but respectful engagement with processes transcending individual or yet influenced by conscious participation. Outside, night creatures continue activities indifferent to human reflection, owls hunting silent-winged through darkness, mice navigating between shelter and sustenance, vegetation respiring invisible exchange with atmosphere. The natural world demonstrates principles your covenant attempts to incorporate reciprocity rather than extraction, adaptation rather than rigid hierarchy, cyclical renewal rather than linear accumulation. These patterns existed before human social experimentation and continue regardless of particular governance arrangements, yet human systems demonstrate greater resilience when aligned with rather than opposed to fundamental ecological principles. Sleep finally claims consciousness with dreams not of utopian perfection, but continuing implementation, the daily choices through which theory manifests in lived reality, the ordinary interactions through which covenant principles demonstrate effectiveness at supporting human flourishing. The inheritance of absence reveals itself not as material windfall, but conceptual reframing, recognition that genuine wealth exists, not through accumulation extracted from others' deprivation, but through relationships supporting mutual development of capacities previously suppressed by necessity of endless labor, serving others' acquisition. Morning arrives with birdsong preceding visible light, dawn chorus announcing day's potential before human activities resume their particular contribution to landscape's integrated patterns. You wake to worlds sparkling with dew, transformed by sunrise into momentary jewels, adorning simplest grass blade and elaborate rose with equal generosity, natural abundance, distributed according to location rather than status, temporary beauty, available to all perception, regardless of social position. The day unfolds through activities reflecting covenant principles translated into ordinary practice, irrigation maintenance conducted through rotating responsibility rather than assigned burden, harvest preparation coordinated through collective assessment rather than hierarchical command, conflict resolution facilitated through mutual recognition rather than imposed judgment. Each interaction, each decision, each implementation choice represents continued manifestation of social experiment initiated through plague's disruption of traditional authority structures and consciously articulated through seasons of collective experience. From individual perspective, participation in covenant community offers neither perfect satisfaction nor constant harmony, but meaningful engagement with fundamental questions regarding human relationship with one another and surrounding environment. The governance arrangement provides framework for navigating inevitable tensions between individual desire and collective welfare, between immediate convenience and long-term sustainability, between legitimate difference and necessary cohesion. From collective perspective, covenant implementation demonstrates alternative, potentially significant, beyond immediate community boundaries, the wheat sheaf currency circulating through regional markets, the diplomatic connections with similar experiments elsewhere, the visitors arriving with curiosity about governance without gallows. Whether specific arrangement endures against inevitable challenges from traditional authority matters less than transmission of possibility, the knowledge that alternatives exist to arrangements previously accepted as inevitable as seasons. From historical perspective, your community's experiment participates in broader pattern where catastrophic disruption occasionally creates space for social rearrangement beyond continuous evolution, moments when absence carved by disaster becomes presence of new possibility through conscious articulation rather than mere restoration of previous hierarchy. The outcome remains unpredictable for participants immersed within process, yet significance transcends ultimate longevity through demonstration that opens conceptual territory previously closed through natural order's justifications for inequality. Standing once more at day's end upon valley's edge, same location physically yet transformed through relationship rather than material reconstruction, you recognize essence of inheritance received not through aristocratic misfortune, but through collective reimagination. Wealth exists not in accumulation, but circulation. Prosperity manifests through relationship rather than possession. Abundance emerges through reciprocity rather than extraction. The valley below continues its evening transition. Lamps kindled in cottage windows, smoke rising from cooking fires, human movements gradually slowing as daylight diminishes, while nocturnal creatures begin their particular contributions to integrated landscape. The pattern represents neither perfect implementation of abstract ideal nor temporary anomaly awaiting inevitable correction, but ongoing demonstration that absence created space for presence of different social arrangement. Vacancy became opportunity through intentional covenant rather than mere restoration of traditional authority. The owl you heard seasons ago calls again, voice unchanged yet context transformed through human arrangements evolving beneath its hunting territory. Its night-adapted vision perceives landscape differently than daylight perspective, yet integrated pattern remains consistent regardless of perceptual variation. Covenant principles manifest through relationships rather than mere physical alterations, through interactions rather than merely structural rearrangements. You close your eyes one final time, feeling land's pulse beneath feet, planted firmly on soil that supports human experiment while transcending its particular manifestation. The heartbeat continues, regardless of social arrangements constructed above its surface, yet human participation influences its quality through cumulative choices regarding relationship with rather than mere extraction from supporting environment. Opening eyes to world now sparkling with both literal starlight and metaphorical illumination of understanding, you perceive landscape mended rather than merely altered, covenant governance resembling gold veins, filling cracks, created through catastrophic disruption, creating stronger whole through acknowledgement of damage rather than pretense of perfection. The transformation represents not rejection of heritage, but transmutation, valuable elements preserved, while underlying justifications for inequality, fundamentally recontextualized through covenant perspective, valuing mutual flourishing above hierarchical extraction. The inheritance of absence reveals its true nature, not material windfall, but conceptual reframing. Recognition that plague did not create wealth, but merely carved away distortion, obscuring accurate assessment. Genuine prosperity, exists not through concentration, but distribution, not through extraction, but reciprocity, not through dominance, but partnership. The covenant community demonstrates wealth, measured through relationship quality, rather than possession quantity. Fabric mended with gold veins of shared labor, and mourning transmuted into celebration, that life continues, transformed yet persistent, through human arrangement, consciously aligned with rather than opposed to fundamental principles of mutual flourishing. What begins with plague ends with recognition. You were never poor except through arrangement, channeling abundance away from its creation toward its concentration. The inheritance received through catastrophe's disruption of traditional authority exists not as material acquisition, but conceptual liberation. Freedom to imagine social relationships beyond hierarchy, justified through tradition, rather than demonstrated effectiveness at supporting human flourishing within ecological context that ultimately sustains all human arrangements, regardless of their particular configuration. The valley continues its existence, physical location unchanged, while relationships fundamentally transformed through conscious covenant rather than hierarchical extraction. The inheritance remains not as possession, but as possibility demonstrated through daily implementation, each interaction, each decision, each cultural expression, manifesting principles, valuing mutual recognition above dominance, reciprocity above accumulation, stewardship above ownership. Above, stars continue their ancient patterns, constellations, named by generations, who similarly navigated between cosmic indifference and immediate experience, between natural constraints and cultural creation, between individual mortality and collective continuity. Between these scales, universal and particular, your community carves meaningful space through conscious covenant, connecting absence to presence, vacancy to opportunity, loss to possibility. The inheritance of absence reveals itself fully, not what plague took away, but what its devastating impact made visible. Capacity for mutual flourishing, previously suppressed beneath hierarchy, justified through tradition, rather than demonstrated effectiveness at supporting genuine prosperity, measured through relationship quality rather than possession quantity. The gold veins mending fabric, torn through catastrophic disruption, shine not through material value but meaningful connection, shared labor and mourning transmuted into celebration, that life continues, transformed yet persistent, through human arrangement, consciously aligned with rather than opposed to fundamental principles, supporting not merely survival but genuine flourishing within ecological context that ultimately sustains all human experiments in social organization, regardless of their particular configuration or ultimate longevity. The world sparkles with recognition. You were never poor except through arrangement defining you as such. The inheritance is not wealth newly acquired, but distortion finally removed, revealing capacity for mutual flourishing that existed always beneath hierarchy's extractive logic. The plague did not make you wealthy, it only carved away the lie that you were ever poor.